So again, we want to welcome everyone to Environmental Fridays. This is season 9. Environmental Fridays. It is personal. You see our website URL here, our link, and then at the bottom right is a QR code that will take you to our website. This morning, to get things started, I want to acknowledge and honor the life of Jane Goodall, who passed away October 1st, I believe. She was 91 years old. And start off by mentioning that she was a primatologist, conservationist, anthropologist, but she was much more than that. Some of this here would reflect that. So, for example, two of the quotes that I thought were really cool that she is attributed to her. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. Well, she made a whole lot of difference in our world, and her legacy does continue. The greatest danger to our future is apathy. And for our high school students and stuff, look up the word apathy. Um, and maybe think about that. The greatest danger to our future is apathy. You cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. Those are two powerful statements from Dr. Jane Goodall. Some of the things that I wanted to mention, she spent 65 years studying chimpanzees. Just think about that. She lived for 91 and she did research and studies
Yeah.
for 65. That is amazing, truly amazing. She is the founder of the Jane Goodall Institute, and that institute seeks to promote, encourage, and embody what they refer to as compassion for all living things. She also was very interested in young people and getting them involved. And so she started this organization called Roots and Shoots. All of these, if you just put the names that I have here, Jane Goodall Institute or Roots and Shoots, um, you will get directly to those websites. So that Roots and Shoots is to empower young people to affect positive change in their communities. So that was the purpose, is the purpose of Roots and Shoots. And perhaps one of these sessions, we would have someone from these organizations come and speak with us. She is the author of 27 books. My Lord, 27 books. She is the subject of 40 movies, not one, 40 movies about her life, her work. So if you're talking about somebody making a difference and the legacy that she's leaving in the books, in the movies, it's phenomenal. She was also appointed as the United Nations, as a United Nations Messenger of Peace. Again, if you want to find out more of any of these things that we have listed here, just type it in Google and you will get hits on it. Go to YouTube and put in Jane Goodall, and you will find lots and lots and lots of video of her speaking, of her work, of movies based on her. One of the ones that I think that everybody should take a look at that was really very timely is Netflix started a series called Famous Last Words. And the very first one in that series is on Jane Goodall. I think it's less than an hour, it's about 55 minutes. And so that's a really good one to take a look at. Famous Last Words, Dr. Jane Goodall on Netflix. So we just want to honor the life of Jane Goodall for her phenomenal impact, consequential work, and for making a difference in our world and a difference that is going to last for generations to come. So here again, we want to show you the schedule for the rest of this semester, this session, season 9. At the top left is a QR code that will take you directly to see all of our guest speakers and co-hosts. Their photos and their bios are all listed and shown there. At the bottom right is a QR code that will get you to all of our past episodes. They're all on YouTube. And I think we are up to about 134 different episodes now. We also want to pay tribute to and acknowledge some of our co-sponsors. That includes the Michigan Eagle Environmental Impact Grants, Caribbean Compass, ACS, which stands for American Chemical Society Committee on Minority Affairs, Benton Spirit Community Newspaper, and GC Scored. Every Piece Matters. Here is a more detailed picture of schedule of our October speakers. And so you can see here, we have one more October 31st, but these are the first four for the month of October. And we'll be listening to Elizabeth this morning. We want to really encourage you each week to take a look at, after you take, uh, are you, that you're a part of this live stream, or you took a look at some of the videos online, to send us some of your thoughts, your feedback, what we refer to as testimonials, and they will be published on our page, on our website. So give us some feedback, 100 words or less. Send it to me, Murray D at environmentalfridays.com, and we'll get your thoughts published. Okay. At this point, I'd like to introduce our two co-hosts for today, Simone Walcott and Marshallie Stewart. Simone is currently employed as the chief technician and adjunct lecturer in organic chemistry at the University of West Indies, St. Augustine, Trinidad. And I'm not going to read through all of her bio here, but to refer to the fact that she has expertise in phytochemistry. That's for especially for our high school students, that's chemistry of plants. And so it's connected in some way to our topic here today. She is also highly committed to education, broadly speaking, not only in a school setting, but also with in terms of the public. And so she would be introducing our speaker. Then our second co-host today is Marshallie. She currently works at Andrews University supporting the departments of biology and physics. And I got to know her. They're very enthusiastic about continuing her learning. And she was trained in biochemistry and molecular biology at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. What is particularly relevant to us here today is that she did research that examined environmental sampling and occupational exposure in firefighters. And we have a commitment from both of them that there would be future guest speakers for us. So at this point, we will hear from Simone as she introduces our guest speaker today.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Murray. So it's really nice being with you all on this episode of Environmental Fridays. So our speaker today is Miss Elizabeth Esner, and she is a PhD candidate in forestry at Mississippi State University. She holds BS degrees in ecology and genetics from the University of Georgia. Her PhD research focuses on mapping the genetic variation of invasive plants and identifying more environmentally friendly alternatives to traditional herbicides. So I'm really looking forward to hearing that aspect. Along with starting a student organization focused on invasive species, Elizabeth has been involved in many invasive plant removals and is passionate about spreading awareness of the impacts of invasive species. So this morning's presentation promises to be very interesting. So I now pass you over to Elizabeth, who will share with us this morning.
All right.
Yes, can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank
Mhm.
you for that amazing introduction. So, yes, I'll be talking about the environmental impacts of invasive species. Just to start off, a little bit about me and my background. I grew up in Wisconsin. I was very lucky to grow up in an area with a lot of forests that I spent my childhood exploring. So, I grew up loving nature and the outdoors and science in general. And then in high school, I became interested in genetics. We had a special little extra class session about it, and I just thought it was fascinating. So when I decided to go off to college, I went to the University of Georgia for my bachelor's, go dogs, and I started out majoring in genetics because that was what I had loved in high school. And I really liked it, but the program there was very human focused. A lot of people were interested in studying medicine, and I noticed that whenever we got to pick our own topic, most people picked human diseases and genetics, and I was always the person who picked a random plant that the rest of the class groaned about when I gave my presentation. And that kind of made me realize that something was missing, that I didn't just want to learn the human aspect and I wanted to get back to my connection to nature. So I added a degree in ecology, which was a great decision. And I've loved the combination of genetics and ecology and getting to study things on the very small level of the DNA in our cells and the very big level of landscapes and how we interact with them. I always knew that I was interested in research. And I tried it out in a bunch of different subjects while I was an undergraduate. I first started out researching lizard limb development, and I was part of the lab that actually made the first genetically engineered reptile, which is pictured here. So I got to play with the little baby albinos. That was very fun, but I realized that limb development wasn't really my thing, and I wasn't a huge fan of doing research with animals. I just felt that there was other research that I liked more. So next, I tried out mapping larval dispersal. I thought maybe marine biology would be for me because I've always been interested in the ocean. But through this project, I realized that computer modeling isn't really my thing. I like more of a connection directly to nature. I like being able to touch things. And I also realized that the ocean is a bit bigger and scarier to me than I thought it was, and that I like things on land. So next, I had an internship with an arboretum where I studied strawberry plants and how their genetics affects how they adapt to and interact with environmental contaminants. And through this research, I decided I do like working with plants. This is what I want my research area to be. But one of the things that I still felt was missing was this directly applied application to the environment around me. I was studying strawberries growing in test tubes, and I wanted something a bit more out in nature. And one of the things that I had been involved in growing up was invasive plant removals. In my area, garlic mustard was the big one growing up, so my family would have yearly garlic mustard ditch pulls. But in college, I also got involved, and there was a small forest on the campus that the organization that I founded really took to managing and trying to remove the invasive plants in that. And through this work, I realized how interested I was in invasive plants and finding better ways to manage them, which led me to my PhD research. So I'm currently getting my PhD in forestry at Mississippi State University and I study invasion ecology, population genetics, and plant chemistry. But more specifically, I look at the genetic variation of Kogon grass, which is an invasive plant in the southeastern US. So I look at how it differs in different locations and how closely related those locations are, and also how it spreads based on that genetic data. And then I also look at using chemicals from Kogon grass to limit its spread. Right now, the most effective way of managing Kogon grass is herbicides, which unfortunately have other negative impacts on the environment. So we're looking at whether we can use chemicals that Kogon grass itself produces as a more environmentally friendly alternative. But today I'm going to be talking a bit more about invasive species in general, what their impacts are, and ways that everyone, whether you're in high school or anywhere else in life, can help manage them and limit their spread. So, to start off with a definition, and this is the USDA definition, but I think it's a pretty good one that encompasses other definitions. So, an invasive species is something that is non-native or alien to the ecosystem under consideration and whose introduction causes or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. So, with this definition, the and does a lot of heavy lifting. An invasive species is not considered invasive unless it's both not native to the ecosystem, so did not originate there, did not involve there, or did not evolve there, was brought by humans, and whose introduction causes or is likely to cause harm. So, some other related definitions and things that people kind of get tripped up on when they're talking about invasive species. So, a native species is a species that is part of the balance of nature that has developed over hundreds or thousands of years in a particular region or ecosystem. So, either the species has been there since before human impact, or it has evolved um, without being brought somewhere by humans. It's evolved in the place that it originated. There's non-native species, which is something that sometimes people swap out when they're talking about invasives, but a non-native species is simply anything living in areas where it did not naturally exist. So any species living in an area where it was brought by humans instead of just originating there. And then there are pest species, which sometimes people also swap out for invasives, but they're not the same thing. A pest species is any organism that poses health, environmental, economic, or aesthetic risks. So, an invasive species is something that is non-native and a pest. But you can be a non-native species and not have any negative impacts, or you can be a pest species that is native to that area, and those are distinct from invasive species. Some examples, so native, these are all in the US. A native is a monarch butterfly. We all know and love their migrations. A non-native species that is not considered a pest is the western honeybee. They do compete a little bit with native bees, but they're generally not seen as causing large-scale problems, and we really like that they pollinate our plants and our crops. So that's a good example of something that is not native. They're from Europe, but we don't consider them a pest. A good example of a native pest is the eastern subterranean termite. Termites eat wood, they can cause a lot of damage to buildings and houses, so we generally don't like having them around, but they are native. Whereas an invasive is the spotted lanternfly, which is not from the US, and it's a pest because it causes a lot of problems by feeding on the sap in plants and trees and causing damage that can lead to those plants dying. So once again, you can have something that's non-native but not a pest. You can have something that's native but a pest. But then if you combine those two categories, it's an invasive. So why are some organisms just non-native versus those that become invasive? So this here is a cane toad, and I feel like it's a really good example of all these things that tend to make organisms go into that pest category and invasive category. So invasive species generally lack predators, competitors, and diseases in the invaded area. They're in, when they come to this new region, they don't have anything that's going to limit their population. So, for example, these cane toads are highly toxic to predators, so things don't really like to eat them. A lot of invasive species also have high reproductive rates. Cane toads are able to reproduce really easily, so the combination of those two things, of there's nothing eating them and they reproduce really easily, means that their populations can grow really quickly. A lot of invasive organisms are also highly adaptable. They get to this new region and they're able to survive in it, even though it's not what they evolved to survive in. The cane toad is a great example of this too, because they eat pretty much anything that crosses their path, so their diet is highly adaptable. So they don't need anything specific. They can pretty much survive wherever there are crawling insects. So all of these things are more likely to make an organism invasive, whereas non-native organisms typically either they don't have high reproductive rates or they have some predators and competitors in the area that make it so that they can't reach these high population levels where they cause damage. Now, how did we get invasive organisms? Partially, it's directly our own fault. We like pretty things. Horticulture and the pet trade introduce a lot of new species, so some good examples are wisteria, which is a gorgeous plant, but here in the southeast, the non-native version of wisteria chokes trees because it's a vining plant and the vines wrap around the trees, which then cuts off their growth. And that was, people planted it purposefully because they thought it was pretty, and then it spread to native areas. The lionfish is a great example of how invasive species can escape the aquarium trade. So the lionfish was originally sold as pets and to collectors, but some escaped into the ocean, and now they cause huge issues in the Caribbean because they eat a lot of native fish. We've also brought things over as food sources. A good example of that is the apple snail, which was introduced to Southeast Asia because they thought people might want to eat it. People did not want to eat it, and it spread out of control and it harms a lot of other native snails. We've also brought things over for ecosystem engineering purposes. If you've heard of kudzu, the vine that ate the South, that's what's pictured here. It grows really rapidly and it can cover buildings and trees and shade everything else out. But it was originally brought over because areas were having issues with erosion. They were having a lot of soil loss, and they thought that kudzu would stabilize the soil. And it does stabilize the soil, but then it keeps growing and covers everything else as well. We've also brought organisms over as biocontrol, so to deal with either pests or other invasive species. The mongoose is a good example of this. It was brought over, I think, to control toads in some areas, but also other organisms. But then it spread on its own and started eating things that we did not want it to eat. There's also been a lot of unintentional movement where it's still because of humans, but it's not things we intentionally did. One of the big examples of this is ballast water. So when you have these big ships, to balance themselves, they take up water from the ocean and then they let that water back out. And when they do this, they take up whatever organisms are in the water. So not necessarily big fish or anything like that, but small microorganisms like algae or even small invertebrates can get in there. And then when they go into a different port, they release that water for balance, but they also release all those species that were in the water. So a lot of species hitch a ride on boats. Shipping containers is also a big source of invasive species. If you see these air filters here, so shipping containers take in air and they have this filter that often catches seeds and sometimes small insects. And then when they get to the next port, that filter, because the air is not flowing, it'll drop those seeds. And the shipping container can then spread those organisms to wherever it goes. So one of my collaborators does a lot of research on exactly what species are coming in on these shipping containers and how likely they are to establish. Wood pellets are also a big source of insects in particular, and soil in the horticulture trade. You can get insects that live in the soil, and you didn't know they were there. You didn't intend to move them, but they came in with the plant that you imported from a different country. So, why do we care at all about this? Why do we care about invasive species? What are those harms that are talked about in the definition? So, the big harms are changes in ecosystem processes, biodiversity loss, human health impacts, and economic costs. So, to start off with changes in ecosystem processes, how a lot of invasive organisms work is that because they have those high reproductive rates and few predators, they can grow to really large population sizes really quickly. I generally study plants, so I'm going to talk about it in terms of them, but I will try to include animals as well. For plants, what this generally looks like is you get a whole area that's covered by just one species. So with the grass I study, Kogon grass, you'll just get fields of Kogon grass, maybe some trees growing in there, but not really much else. Whereas in the native ecosystem, you'd have a bunch of different plants. With animals, how this works is that they get to really big population numbers, so then they have to eat a lot of things. They need food to sustain those population numbers, so they consume a lot of native species, whether that's plants, whether that's insects, small mammals, depends on the organism. And the impacts of an invasive species will always depend on the organism itself. But a lot of organisms change ecosystem processes. So, one thing that they do, some, is increase fire intensity and frequency. So, in the western US, there's cheatgrass, which is pictured up top here. And that causes a lot of issues because there's already concerns about fire out west. Fires are getting more frequent, they're getting bigger, causing more damage to human properties. And this cheatgrass is highly flammable, and it also creates a lot of above ground material that then just adds fuel to the fire. So there's a lot of efforts to manage this to try and reduce the fire risk in the West that is already growing due to other factors like climate change, but this invasive plant can make it worse. They can also change water cycling. So salt cedar or tamarisk, which is seen down here, typically grows along rivers or along waterways, but it uses a lot more water than native species. So it can cause rivers to essentially dry up, and then that takes away water from the native species that need it, and it also reduces water resources for humans. They can also change landscape structures. So in the corner here is a nutria. It's a large rodent, and they eat marsh grasses. They live in marshes. But in the eastern US, they eat so much marsh grass that they essentially get rid of the marsh grass, and the marsh grass is what holds the soil in place in these ecosystems. So when you get rid of the marsh grass, you have a lot of erosion and you lose the soil, and you essentially lose the entire marsh and all the species that came with it. They can also change nutrient cycling. Once again, with plants, plants that grow more might leave behind more dead standing material, especially for things like grasses that typically die back over the winter. And if this standing material decomposes really quickly, you might have large influxes of nutrients into the ecosystem that weren't there before and can allow other invasive species to grow because the native species aren't used to being able to take advantage of those nutrients. Or if that material doesn't break down very quickly, you can have those plants kind of holding on to the nutrients, and then there's fewer available for native plants. Invasive plants also cause a lot of biodiversity increases because of what I talked about before. They use up a lot of resources, they grow really well, so they outcompete native species. A good example of that is the Eurasian green crab, which is spreading on both coasts of the US now, and it outcompetes other native crab species for food. So it eats the food that those species were going to eat and reduces the population numbers of other crabs. They can also indirectly reduce food sources. So this is coconut grass, the plant that I study, and it blankets really large areas of the forest. And what this does is it reduces the food source. So the native plants that would normally be there that other organisms like to eat are no longer there. And coconut grass isn't something that native organisms like to eat. It's really sharp, so it hurts their mouth, and they don't like to eat it. So now in this system that you see here, there's no food for the native species that live there. They also consume native organisms. One of the more famous examples is the brown tree snake. So the brown tree snake was introduced to areas like Hawaii and Guam, and it eats bird eggs and small reptiles and rodents. And because of how many bird eggs it eats, there's been extinction of at least 9 bird species in Guam purely due to this snake. They can also hybridize with native species. So the brown trout that we see here can hybridize with native trout species, but these offspring are sterile. So you get an issue where the native trout are reproducing, but their offspring are no longer native and they can't reproduce anymore. And eventually, you genetically lose the native species. You just get a mix of the native and invasive, or sometimes you end up with just the invasive species because they often reproduce more effectively. Invasive species also drive extinctions. They don't just reduce biodiversity, they also can lead to the extinction of other native species. So if we look at this diagram here, these are the 5 main drivers of extinction, and invasive species is one of that top 5. On islands, they cause a lot of issues because organisms on islands typically aren't adapted to as wide of a range of predators. So with that example of the brown tree snake in Guam, a lot of those were ground nesting birds that weren't used to snakes stealing their eggs. They didn't have any way to prevent that. So when that new predator came in, they weren't adapted and they did not survive. So invasive species are linked to 86% of all recorded extinctions on islands. And more generally, they've played a role in 60% of species extinctions. So that means that maybe there were these other factors going on as well, but invasive species was part of the reason why that species went extinct. And then they are the sole cause of 16% of species extinctions, which is a big number in a world that is losing a lot of species very rapidly. If we could take out one of these categories and only have to fix the others, that would help a lot. Invasive species also have direct impacts on human health, so they can spread disease to new areas. The Asian tiger mosquito has the ability to carry diseases that organisms native to North America do not. Dengue is one of those. So now, when you get this mosquito, you can also get those new diseases that we didn't want in the first place spreading to people, but now there's a larger population that can be harmed by them. They can also increase the spread of previously existing diseases. So, one example is ticks and Lyme disease, which is a big problem in the eastern US. And the ticks are native, the Lyme disease is native. But when you get invasive plants, they create more habitat for these ticks, and more ticks means more Lyme disease spread. So the plants themselves aren't spreading the disease, and the ticks are native, but you still get increased spread of an unwanted disease. They can also directly harm people. If you're in the southeast, you've probably been bitten by a fire ant, and at the very least, it's very unpleasant and causes painful sores. But some people are also allergic to them and have a more life-threatening reaction. So you get the spread of these species that can directly harm people. There's also a lot of economic costs. Recent estimates put the cost of invasive species in the US at $26 billion per year, which is a lot of money that could be spent on other conservation. A lot of this is the cost of management. So the cost of trying to get rid of these species is very expensive, but it's also the cost of reduced production. So, for example, these sea lampreys in the Great Lakes, they feed on fish that are commercially important that people are buying for food. So then the fishermen have lower harvests. They can also reduce forage for production animals. So cattle out west, they don't like to eat this leafy spurge over here on the right, but it grows in their fields. So then farmers have to either pay to bring in more hay and have more forage, or they just can have less cattle and we get a lot lower production. They can also lower crop yield. There's a lot of invasive insects that feed on crops or invasive plants that will grow with the crops and are hard to manage and reduce yield. They can also damage infrastructure. So this is the zebra mussel. And sorry, this picture is a little grainy, but those are zebra mussels growing within a pipe. So they will grow within pipes in water filtration systems or sewage treatment plants, and they block those pipes so that they have to be replaced frequently. And that's a lot of damage to our infrastructure that we need to pay to keep up with. One of the slogans of Environmental Fridays is "It is personal." And so I wanted to share a kind of a case study about an invasive species and part of why I got into this research. So, like I said, I grew up in Wisconsin. I really enjoyed forested areas. And on my family's property, there was these wetlands full of ash trees. And these are great diverse ecosystems. Wetlands are great for sequestering carbon and for water filtration. And a big part of that was these ash trees. And as a kid, I loved to explore out there. I thought everything was so fascinating. And my dad also hunted out there, and it was just this great area. But when I was 8, this insect, the emerald ash borer, arrived in Wisconsin. And the emerald ash borer feeds on ash trees. It bites into the bark and gets beneath it, and it disrupts the flow of nutrients in the tree, which eventually kills it. So this area, which these are not pictures from my house because I'm terrible at taking pictures when I need to, but this is a similar ecosystem. So it went from what we saw before in the background to looking like this, just a sea of dead trees. And not only is this really sad, it's the loss of this great ecosystem. Um, I can't go out and explore it anymore because when you have an area full of standing dead trees, it's really dangerous to walk around in there because you have a high risk of the tree falling on your head. So I can't explore anymore. I can't, or my dad can't hunt in there anymore. So it's a loss not only of the great species that made this ecosystem what it was, but also of humans being able to interact with this ecosystem in the way they did before. So that's my little case study and a show that it is personal. Sometimes these impacts can seem far off. Maybe you don't live on the Great Lakes and your pipes aren't being clogged by the zebra mussel, but these things can impact any ecosystem that you love and care about. Unfortunately, the rate of introduction is only increasing. So, this is from an IPBES report. They did this great comprehensive report on the state of invasive species. Everyone should go check that out if they're interested. It's from 2023. But they found that for all species, the rate of introductions is increasing. Part of this is due to increased globalization. Like we talked about before, a lot of species move around when humans move around. They move around on ships, they move around in packages. So, with increased globalization, more connections between places, more species are also moving between those places. Climate change is also playing a big impact as the climate changes and the settings in an ecosystem change, more species can invade there. So you might have a bird that formerly wouldn't have been able to survive in North America, but now the temperatures are warming up And now that bird can survive in an area where it previously couldn't and is competing with all those native species that are already under the stresses of climate change. So, those are the issues, and what is being done about them? What are we doing to work on this? So, the first big thing is prevention efforts. The best way to stop an invasive species is to have it never get to a new area in the first place. So, that involves a lot of monitoring of shipping materials, putting filters on ballast water so that it doesn't release new species or take them up in the first place. Monitoring those shipping containers and their filters to try and prevent those seeds from coming over. So, really, just limiting new species being introduced. At least in the US, we're a lot more careful now about bringing in new plants for horticulture or new insects for biocontrol. We try to make sure that we think they won't be invasive, even though we can't always predict what will happen. And many countries have lists of invasive organisms for which movement is regulated both into and within the country. So in the US, the grass I work with, we had to get special permits to move it across state lines. So there are regulations. And this is one of the reasons that if you've ever been through customs, that they don't like you bringing in seeds or any foreign plant material or animal material, is that especially live insects and plant seeds can become invasive. Another thing that we're working on is eradication efforts. So, you guys probably heard the story of the murder hornets back around 2020. And that was an insect that people knew would cause a problem. They knew its life history and that it reproduces easily and that it can cause environmental damage. So when those were first reported, there was big efforts to quickly eradicate the new populations, and they were successful. They managed to eradicate all the populations of this hornet. And I think they may have been reintroduced since then, but it does show that for smaller populations, we can still make an impact and we can still eradicate them if we work quickly. But once populations get bigger, it's really hard to eradicate them completely. Oftentimes, these are organisms that are really good at growing, they're really good at reproducing and moving. So it's hard to completely wipe out their population in a new area. So for well-established species that have been here for a while, it's more about stopping the spread to new areas. So one big example of that is in the northeastern US. There's a big push to buy it where you burn it, to not move your firewood because emerald ash borer frequently lives in dead wood. These ash trees were dying, people were using them as firewood and spreading the insect to other areas. So there's a big push to not move firewood or anything that could contain these invasive insects to areas where it might not be yet. We don't have emerald ash borer that we know of yet in Mississippi. So if you're coming to Mississippi, please do not bring any firewood with you. Also, cleaning landscaping equipment or boats between sites to clean off any invasive hitchhikers, any plants or seeds that you may have picked up while you were boating or while you were mowing.
So,
As long as you...
Elizabeth, we have a little problem. We're not seeing your slides. We just seen a Zoom thing right now. I don't.
Oh, okay.
I was able to get it back because I saw where it said at the top Elizabeth's screen, and I
Yeah.
clicked on that on the top of my
Oh,
screen.
okay, okay. Yes, Alberta's screen showed up for some reason. Okay, I got it. So if anybody else is having that problem at the top, go click on Elizabeth screen. Okay, good, good. All right, thanks.
Okay, do we have it back? Yeah, thanks for letting.
Yes, we do.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Um, yes, so stopping the spread on boats, on landscape equipment, and there's also a lot of efforts to reduce population size. Unfortunately, pesticides is one of the main ways of doing this. It's one of the most effective, especially for plants. Herbicides are often our best option when you can't physically remove all of the material. But pesticides have other off-target effects. They generally don't just kill the plant that you want to kill, they kill everything that's there. We can also use traps. So for insects and larger mammals, Burmese pythons in Florida, they're using traps with robotic bunnies to lure them in. So I thought that was fun. Biocontrol. So biocontrol is when you use another organism to try and limit the population size of the pest organism. So examples of this, frequently for insects, they will bring in parasites, hopefully that are only, oh, I think did it stop screen sharing?
Yes, it came back again. Let's see.
Thing is messed up. Is Alberto, could you stop?
Mm.
I don't know what you have to stop, but something.
Okay, it's back
Sorry,
again.
sorry, sorry. I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, okay.
Okay, so
Sorry,
now we
sorry.
only have Elizabeth's. Okay.
Sorry.
And we are still on that one slide, what is being done, is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay, all right.
Okay, hopefully we can get through the rest. We're almost
Okay.
there.
Okay.
Um, so yes, biocontrol is when we use a different species to manage a species. So typically it's something parasitic where it will reduce the population growth of that insect, or it's an insect that eats a plant and will reduce its population. Manual removal is common. With plants, you can just go and pull them out of the ground, and that can reduce the populations. There's also cultural controls, so hunting or harvesting these animals for food or plants for food can help not necessarily eradicate a population, but definitely reduce the levels and therefore reduce the impact that it has. But there are a lot of challenges to management. So, like I said before, large populations are difficult to manage. Once there are a lot of a species, it's hard to get every single individual, especially with animals that move around. Plants are sometimes a bit easier because they can't escape you, they can't move, but they're also difficult to kill because one round of an herbicide application, for example, won't kill every single plant. If you do weeding, you'll probably miss some, or there'll be some in the seed bank. So once there's a certain number of organisms, it can be really difficult to completely eradicate the population. And there's also lag times that prevent fast action. So in the example I gave with the murder hornets, they're kind of a big organism, so we knew that they were here pretty quickly and were able to manage those small populations. But with a lot of organisms, they're a lot smaller and it's really hard to tell that they're even here. So if you have five of a plant growing in some field in the middle of the forest, we might not know it's there until the population has gotten a lot bigger and it's causing problems. And at that point, then you're back to this issue of how to manage that large population. Like I said before, management methods can also be harmful to other organisms. Sometimes you have the trade-off of we have an invasive plant that is growing in this ecosystem and is reducing food for this native organism that's endangered. But if we try to use herbicides on it, that will also be a danger to the native organism. So you have to be careful about making sure that your management methods don't cause larger problems than the invasive does itself. Management is also really expensive. Herbicides are expensive. Paying people to manage these organisms is expensive. And oftentimes, places just don't have the budget to put enough in to actually eradicate the population. But what can you do? So there's a lot of work being done on this, but there's a lot that you guys, as anyone, can do. So the first is to educate yourself on invasive species in your area. One great resource for this is university extension pages. Agricultural universities will generally have great information on invasive species in your area and how to help manage them. A quick Google search will also just help you learn more about things that are invasive and what you can do. You can organize or join removal efforts. So, especially with invasive plants, it's really easy to get out there and pull them up. And that reduces the population size. Even if you don't fully eradicate it, at least native organisms have a chance to move in. So, maybe there's some going on in your community that you can do already, or you can organize them yourself. If you talk to local land managers of public areas like parks or forests, they're generally very happy to have you come in and help with these removals. You can also talk to city or campus planners and landscapers. A lot of campuses already have plans that they want to replace all of the invasive plants that are used for landscaping with native ones or non-invasive ones in the next 10 years. So you can talk about to them about how you can help with that. Maybe you can help them secure funding to remove these plants a little faster, or you can talk to them about making that plan if they don't have one in place already. You can talk to them about why invasive plants are bad and what plants they can replace them with. You can also use citizen science apps to report where invasive species are. Things like iNaturalist are great, especially for researchers like me. Sometimes there's so many invasive species spread out over such a large area that people doing this research can't keep track of it all. We don't know where they all are. So this is really helpful for people trying to manage the invasive species to know where to focus. And who knows, maybe you would be the person to be the first to report that invasive species is in your area. So keeping an eye out on things and reporting them when you see them is very, very helpful. Another thing you can do is plant native species. If you have any control over landscaping or even plants you can put in a pot and put on your porch, choose to make it a native plant that can help pollinators and won't contribute to this problem of invasive species. You can also take steps to minimize species spread. So if you go boating, make sure it's cleaned off. Don't move firewood between areas. If you go for a hike, try to clean off your boots or your pants before you go to a new natural area so that you're not spreading any seeds or microorganisms when you walk all over the place. So, in summary, invasive species are organisms that are not native to an area and cause harm, with that and being very important. They have to do both. And they cause harm by changing ecosystems, causing biodiversity declines, harming human health, and costing a lot of money. The rate of invasions is increasing, but we can help slow the spread through prevention, eradication, and management. And then the biggest ways to help are to know what invasive species are in your area, work to prevent their spread and to remove them, and to promote native species. So I hope everyone learned something, and I think we have some time for questions.
Marshall, Marshall, are you there? On mute. Well, while she's getting it together here, I want to thank you very much, Elizabeth, for your presentation. It was really good. I, in my notes, I put down great explainer, clear, well organized, informative, and you should be a teacher,
Thank
definitely.
you.
Yes. So if that's one of your options you're considering, and this was a dry run, oh yeah, you did really well.
Thank
Marshall, you want to?
I'm here. I'm here.
Okay.
Elizabeth, I really enjoyed your talk. It was very informative. It was literally food for thought.
you.
Stuff we don't think about when we are walking around in, like for us, we're in Michigan, and you never actually think about what's not supposed to be here. So that was really cool. There were a few questions in the chat.
Okay.
Um, a little mentioned Japanese knotweed. And Chris mentioned kudzu and honeysuckle, which I guess are invasive to where they are. So do you have any thoughts on those species?
I can't say I know as much about Japanese knotweed just because I've been in the South for a bit and it's not as common down here. So I'm sorry about that. Kudzu and honeysuckle, I do know more about because they're very prominent here. Kudzu, to get rid of it. Kudzu, I would think you would be a bit more successful with just pulling it out, cutting it at the base. You can apply herbicide if you want to, but also trying to, yeah, just cut the base of those vines. Honeysuckle, I would say also try cutting at the base. With any invasive plant that you're trying to remove, you have to keep at it. So, for example, there was privet in my yard when I moved in, and I cut it all down, but the stumps resprout. So, what you have to do is every year kind of go out and look and see what's resprouting and just pull those sprouts out. If that's what I would do if you don't want to use herbicides. Herbicides can speed up the process a little bit, but they do have those other negative environmental impacts.
Mm.
So the best way I would say pull out as much as you can and then keep an eye on it for as long as you can.
Very cool. Are there any other questions? Does anyone?
Yeah, I have lots of questions actually.
Same. Same.
So
Go ahead.
let's go back to your research. When did you start doing research? Because that's one area that I'm really interested in, is what I refer to as early research. Did you start in high school? Did you start in college? What year were you a freshman?
I
Just give us a
started,
little bit more.
yeah, I started my second semester of college. So I was a
Yep.
freshman. That was when I started with the lizard limb development research.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that research all throughout college.
Okay.
Um, the environmental modeling or the marine law modeling, I started that in the summer after my sophomore year. That was a COVID research experience of, well, I can
Okay.
do something on the computer for research.
Okay.
And then the strawberry research was the summer after my junior year. I did a summer research internship with an arboretum.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went straight into my PhD after I graduated from my undergraduate.
So the lesson that this teaches, especially our students online and who may watch it, is that you want to get involved in research early and often. Just like Elizabeth just, said, she started early and she did research for the entire time that she was in college. That is really important. The example that I often give is with Kesmika Corbett, who helped to invent the COVID vaccine. She also started doing research when she was in high school, doing chemistry research. So starting out early is really, really important. So that was my first question.
Yeah, and I would just say to add on, a lot of researchers are always looking for help. So if there's a topic you're interested in, if you just send them an email and say, I'm interested in this topic and I would love to help, a lot of people are very responsive.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yep, that's true. Very true. We hearing a
Think
sound.
was
Let's see, I'll mute. Okay. Any other questions? I don't want
yes.
to take all the questions. Any other?
I actually had a question for you.
Okay.
And this is going back to your slide on the ash borer. I thought that was
Yes.
very sad. It was
Yes.
actually hard. I've never felt sad for a tree before. So that was heartbreaking.
Yep.
But I was curious because you showed that the forest was completely devastated after they'd
Yes.
made their way through that forest. And I wonder what happens when the food is gone. Those ash borers, do they hang around and they find another source of food? Do forests like that ever recover?
Hmm.
So they generally will move on to a new forest, but because they can fly, if you do get regeneration, they'll come back pretty quickly.
Hmm.
There's been some research suggesting that especially in these, it's called a black ash swamp. There's not really anything that replaces the black ash
Hmm.
naturally. So if you want new trees to grow, you have to come in and plant other species that will survive. But in a lot of cases, it's kind of futile to try to replant the ash itself because the emerald ash borer will just come back.
Come back.
They're
How
trying
long?
to develop strains that are resistant to the emerald ash borer that can survive, and
Mm.
they're trying to create better treatments for emerald ash borer. But at this point, it's kind of just a loss, which is very sad.
How long did
That
it
is
take to go
unfortunate.
from, that really nice forest of emerald ash to just naked trees?
It can take around, oh, sorry. It can take around 5 years
Okay.
for for
That's
the
a
emerald ash borer to kill the tree.
okay.
But I would say it's closer to around 10 years that you'll get like the all the
Complete.
bark falling off and all the limbs.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
so most people would see it in their lifetime,
Right.
a
Yeah.
forest devastated.
So
Yeah.
I moved sorry. Um my family moved to a different house in 2014, and the trees were all healthy then. There was no tree death. And then the past 2 years, when I've come back home for breaks, the trees are
Mm.
just
Wow.
entirely dead. So it
Wow.
has been something that I've seen in my lifetime.
Yeah, that was dramatic.
Yeah.
I see we have a hand up, Dr. Hines, if you have a question.
I have just an exclamation of gratitude and amazement at someone who has initiated my conversion. I want to thank the presenter so very much. I am very there's a feeling of anger when you travel through airports and they tell you that you can't bring in your delicious, delightful fruit and vegetables. And I rage inwardly and comply and wait for the next trip and rinse and return, rinse and spin again. But today I'm converted, and I want to thank this. Forgive me for addressing you as a young lady. You just appear that way. And for someone to present Dr. Murray, thank you for this inspired series to present on the day that follows Jane Goodall's passing, or the
Mhm.
2 days.
Mhm.
It tells me that science will continue.
Yes.
As Jane goes, there is Elizabeth
Mhm.
and so many others. And I want to thank you for being the intermediary, Dr. Murray, in your Environmental Fridays. I want to concur with the previous speaker when she had that deep sadness
Mhm.
as you went through the devastation of somewhere that you knew and loved and interacted with, and now it's no more. It's amazing what death and dying does to our emotions. So
Mhm.
we are with you in terms of how we feel.
Mhm.
Having said that, the emotional, my my anger and your sadness, what then do we ascribe to what we call the natural seasonal uh, falling of the leaves and rebirth in the spring? Is there any good thing? Is that death? Is that death and rebirth?
Mhm.
What how do you ascribe it? That's one. And two, um, I am amazed at the power of non-humans, because when we talk about deforestation, we imagine machines coming in and hacking those trees, and we have all kinds of conventions at the UN to prevent too much of that. But who can speak to an insect? Who can tell the insect not to? And so, what I hear is symbiosis in all its forms. I hear you enjoining us well, informing us, I'm first educated today that I am a destroyer or a planter, even on my shoes. When I
Hmm.
move from one area to the next, I am doing that, and not even immigration can really stop what's on my boot.
Hmm.
And so it is to be careful. And yet, I say, isn't it that we want? Do we not embrace death because there is rebirth? Uh, Lastly, and maybe this is the question I'd like you to answer, is there a specific intentional program of moving uh, plants or what have you around the US, for example? You spoke of the marshlands and some. Is there a program for Florida? Can we move some insects into Florida to impact the marshlands? Is there a program in the US where you actually transplant stuff to have the ecosystem be impacted? Thanks for the time, and I hope you just answered the last question. Thank you so much.
Yeah, specific programs. So I know a bit more about trying not to move species around because that's what my focus is under studying invasions. Um, I think there is some efforts to restore native ecosystems. A lot of cases, they have vouchers somewhere where they know a little bit about the genetics of something that was originally in an area. So what they'll try to do is get species as similar as possible and, for example, replant marshes or replant mangroves with something that is similar to what was originally there if there has been a complete loss of that ecosystem. I hope that answered the question a little bit.
Yes, and thank you so very much. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of
So
course.
one of the other things I like about your presentation is that um, you showed us examples from all over the world, right? All over the world. And so this is something that is not just a local problem, it's a problem that's global. And as you said in that one chart, if we could at least get a handle on invasive species, it cuts down um, the problem that we have from pollution and other things that are contributing to, destruction of biodiversity.
Yeah, because a lot of times, like pollution or landscape change will reduce the population of an organism, but it can still maybe survive at those low
Mhm.
population numbers. But
Mhm.
then as soon as that invasive species come in, it just can't keep up
Mhm.
anymore. And that's when you get the complete extinction.
Mhm. Mhm. Hey,
Sounds
Simone, did you have any questions or comments too? Our other co-host?
Yeah, yeah, I was curious about the initial part, one of the earliest slides when you were giving your definitions. So what about then a native species moving actually another native species to a non-native area? Well, not even non-native, but an area where it wasn't found originally. So it's not to say it's an invasive species, but rather a native species transported like for example, a wasp, sometimes they take little caterpillars and beetles and put them in their nest, right? But in that transportation, they move around a species that was already native, but you're introducing it in an area per se that it wasn't originally found. So doesn't
Mm.
that also create an issue?
So that's where there's Ooh, hopefully that fixed it. Oh, there. Okay. That's where there's a little bit of debate and why I said human transported. So species can move on their own out of their what we would consider their native boundaries. Sometimes that is, yeah, something where like a bird drops a seed further
Mhm.
than
Hmm.
it has dropped
Mhm.
that seed before. And especially with climate change, this is becoming more of an
Hmm.
issue
Right.
because in the past, if something like that happened, a wasp moved a caterpillar, either that caterpillar probably would have been there a long time ago because it could survive and that wasp was always moving them, or that caterpillar can't survive in that area, and that's why it was never native there. But now with climate change, you're seeing a lot of things where species that were always being moved to an area but couldn't survive now can survive because of climate change. So that is where there's a little bit of debate over things that are a bit more locally moved, things that aren't moved between continents. They're just moved into a new ecosystem and how we manage them. And I personally am a bit more on the side of managing them like a pest, of if they become an issue for the environment, try to stop that. But I am also of the mindset that just because something is non-native doesn't mean we necessarily need to wage all out war on it. That if it's an issue, we do something about it, but otherwise, we can let the ecosystem find its balance.
Okay, right. Yes. Thanks for that answer. It was a very, very interesting talk hearing about some of the things that we take for granted. Right. When I travel from the Caribbean to the States, we usually get that question in immigration. And then what's the issue? But I think we explained it very succinctly. So thanks for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So, Elizabeth and others, have you guys heard about the phrase Columbian exchange? So, during that time when I guess the Americas were being discovered and colonialized and stuff, there was probably the most massive exchange and transport of plants and
Hmm.
animals from Europe, especially.
Yes.
But
Yes.
I'm
And yes.
assuming, right, but I'm assuming from Africa as well,
Yes.
to the New World. A lot of those are things that were not quote unquote invasive in the sense that I mean, grains. I'm looking at it right now. Grains, fruits, vegetables, citrus fruits, olives,
Mhm.
bananas, melons, turnips, sugarcane,
Yeah. Breadfruit.
coffee, breadfruit, right?
Hmm.
So it's
And cookie.
not that a species that comes from another place necessarily is bad, because all of these plants and probably some animals too that came across in that time period have been like essential in terms of economics, in terms of food and stuff like that. Anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point that I hope kind of did get through in my presentation is that yes, non-native organisms can be very important. Like I gave the example of the honeybee. That's
Mm-hmm.
something that pollinates most of our crops right now. And without it, agriculture would be struggling in the
Mm-hmm.
United States, even though it's something that isn't native to here.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it is important to note that yes, not everything that's non-native will be invasive, and we do need that distinction of just because it's not from here doesn't mean it's bad.
Right,
And
right.
also, there are studies that look into characteristics of organisms and trying to predict what will be invasive and what won't. So often things that are more domesticated and rely on humans a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
aren't
Mm-hmm.
as likely to be invasive because if it's
Right,
something I need to plant every year and need
right,
to be very nice to it and fertilize and hope it grows, then it's probably not going to be invasive.
right. Yeah, like
Yeah.
sugarcane and wheat, they're not really invasive. We have to
No.
plant them, cultivate them, take care of them. Yeah.
So
Okay.
I had this question for you, Elizabeth, and it's because you mentioned it earlier, an invasive species that was brought in to deal with another invasive species, and then it turned into its own problem. Are there instances where warring invasive species will eventually balance out in their environment? I don't know if it makes sense the way I asked that question.
No, that does make sense. I'm trying to think if I've heard of any. I don't know that I've heard of any where they balance out. I think I've heard of where one invasive species can essentially eliminate the other, but then that one is still there. But
Mm,
I don't think I've ever heard of any instances where, like you said, they balance each other out and kind of reduce each other's negative effects.
mhm.
That's
be
an
interesting because I'm thinking like kudzu, as much kudzu as there is everywhere, if you found the right predator for kudzu, it would take care of it. You'd have the food source for the predator, and then you kudzu would be,
Mhm.
manageable.
yeah.
So
In that
Goats. Somebody
case, I
said goats
guess,
for kudzu.
yeah, goats can be helpful for kudzu.
Yes.
They will eat it.
Yeah.
But yeah, in that case,
but then
so
the
the
goat wouldn't be
difference,
invasive.
well, it wouldn't necessarily be invasive. It would just be non-native. So there are instances where biocontrol has worked. Um, I cannot remember them off the top of my head, but there are no. Oh, I think kudzu was one where it was working a little bit. There was an insect that they brought in that was eating the kudzu, but that insect also fed on soy, so they
Oh,
stopped bringing it in. They stopped the program
yeah.
because it was causing other issues. But I know that there have been some cases, I think more so with insects, where if you get a really specific parasite that only lives on one insect, that it can cause enough population damage to just the insect that you want to
Mhm.
eliminate. That oftentimes it doesn't eliminate the population entirely, but it'll bring it down to a level where it's not causing as much damage.
Mhm.
Okay.
I'm thinking about in Jamaica, they brought mongoose to get rid of the snakes.
Oh,
It was
that's
so
right.
successful, but now the mongoose go after the chicken.
Yes.
Okay. Yep, yep, that's true. That's the example. Yep, yep, yep.
Very
All
interesting.
right.
Are there any
So,
other questions?
any other questions? Any other
Ah,
comments?
here's
We are
one. There's
getting
one in the
close to the
chat.
top of the hour.
There's one here in the chat. Have they thought of bringing in the zombie fungus?
Are you talking about the
Right.
one that attacks ants? Or is it a different one?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
I don't think so. I don't know if that one attacks multiple species of ants, if
Hmm.
you could use it to just fire ants, or if it would spread to all the native ants, which are already being harmed.
I don't like that word zombie. I don't think you could control zombies.
Not the ants.
All right, guys. So I think we had a really good session here today. Very interesting, very interactive. And we want to thank our two co-hosts, Marshallie and Simone, and our guest speaker, Elizabeth. And we're looking forward to getting that PhD, Dr. Esser.
Thank
That's
you.
right.
Thank you
That's
so much for
right.
having me.
It will be well deserving. And we want to, of course, thank all of our regulars that show up to Environmental Fridays. If it is Friday, it is Environmental Fridays. It is personal. See you guys next week. It will be about nature schools, which should be very interesting.
Thank you so
All right.
much, Elizabeth. It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Murray.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you,
awesome.
Elizabeth.
Thank
Congratulations to all three
Thank
ladies.
you. Thank
The
you.
Yes,
three of you managed this session beautifully. Thank you.
yes,
Bye-bye.
yes.
Thank you. See you soon.
All
Okay, bye.
right.
Until next time.
Okay, take care.
Take care.
All right, bye-bye.